Thank you, Caroline. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure for us to tell about the topic of environment in relation to intensive livestock farming. I'm sitting here together with my colleague Paul Galema. I will start a bit with telling about developments in our country concerning the environment, a little bit history and where we are now. And then Paul will tell about the solutions. So you understand he has the more difficult part and I have the easy. Just to a few impressions about also a little bit how I experienced in my career the topic of environment. Because we have in our presentation our small country, the Netherlands, as case, we thought it is good to widen it up later on with the three invited people who will give a perspective which is wider. Although I think the Netherlands is quite special, but even not that much, because our neighboring countries experience the same. And I think it may be the same in Western France, parts of Italy, parts of Slovenia, Northern Germany, Denmark. So it may have a wider context. Ireland, George will talk about. This is a little bit how the environmental topics came to us. At least this is my interpretation. And the first part I didn't experience so much. That was the part after the Second World War, when farmers were encouraged to produce, just to produce, if possible economically. Then, that was in my first years, animal welfare became in our country a leading force. Actually, it's still today. I think it's also more dominant than the other topics, and it will stay. To give you an example, we have in our country a political party called the Animal Party in the parliament. And that expresses how the society looks at this topic. Nitrate leaching. I come back to that in a moment. That was the first topic I experienced. And now lately it's more nitrogen emissions. I don't know why I don't see the lower part of this slide. I hope that will not continue. But nitrogen emissions in the former century, and at the moment it is back as a big topic. And then we had more the greenhouse and the biodiversity, which is not on this slide, unfortunately, and that is more from recently. That is also directly connected to the EU Green Deal and the goals of the EU Green Deal. As you know, they have targets for the greenhouse gases, minus 90% in 1940. They have the target of 50% less pesticides, and they have the target that should even start this year of 4% of each farm to devote to biodiversity, so set aside. Anyway, I hope, yeah. First, a few words again about animal welfare and nature. This is just some impressions, but this is in our country, I think, quite a discussion. It becomes a societal discussion, and in Europe also. Just to give you an example, I am living in the center of this country, and we have a nature area only 40 years old, reclaimed from the sea, very close to us. We can skate there. So you see me skating there in the winter time, but then sometimes you see deer, and the deer is sometimes, as it is here, And that disturbs the community. And we see then in the last years regularly protests because people don't want that. They start feeding the wild animals and et cetera, et cetera. And that gives discussion, and all what I can say is we should deal with that. There will be also in our country a continuing discussion about how to dealing with nature and animal welfare. A big topic in Europe is known, the wolf entering our country from the east, and also last days again prominent in our newspapers. How to deal with that animal, which is really multiplying quickly. In 1990, my first work at the experimental station was the first thing what was founded was an environmental farm. In those years, that was devoted to nitrogen leaching. That became an issue, societal issue, political issue, leaching of nitrogen. Actually, also phosphorus accumulation. Nitrogen in those days, this farm was built. It's a part of all the ministries, and it is still there. And it is still continuing to work on nitrogen. Just to give you an impression how quickly we could deal with nitrogen, actually, this is a little figure in which the nitrogen content and nitrate content in the upper groundwater is measured on that particular farm. The farm purposely on sandy soils, because sandy soils are very environmentally sensitive. Actually, after 2 years with some management measures, we managed to lower that nitrogen content very substantially. The European guideline is 50 milligrams of nitrate in 1 liter water. That is, we should be below that. Well, on that particular farm, very sensitive soils, they manage. If you look at nitrogen applied in our country, when we started, Paul and me too, we had one guideline, 400 kilograms per hectare. That was generally, and we thought that was fine and good. These days, it went down by more precision farming to, at the most, 250 kilograms. But you cannot go above that, from then you will have penalties. At the moment, we thought we had solved the problem more or less. We had a downward trend in nitrate in this country. But the last few years it comes back. It has become even an EU issue because they notice that we don't go down anymore. In 2018, nitrate in the groundwater started to increase again. So we are again in the middle of how to deal with nitrate leaching. We were wondering how that did happen because farmers didn't change. They were still in the mood of lowering it a bit. The thought at the moment is that it is caused by changing weather. We surely have last year's more dry periods, very dry periods during the growing seasons and sometimes heavy rain. And the conception is that that may cause this increase. Increase, so we need actually to handle more different weather situations. Anyway, it is an issue we have really to work on again, and it has quite big repercussions to the land-tied sectors, arable and dairy farming. Another issue we experienced that came around 2000, before 2000, that was the acidification. That was also ammonia emission, actually. That was ammonia emission. It was for some years a big issue. It was dying trees. And in our country, I remember we had huge discussions, and surely also the manure sector, so the animal sectors, were part of this problem. Actually, it was solved really in a few years, perhaps 5 years. Most important was what happened in the car industry. They started to regulate the output of the cars and the filters which they used, and that concerned nitrogen oxide. That usually helped. And in our country, we did research. It was even on our station, and we proudly found the method of injection of the manure. That reduced emissions, ammonia emissions, by 80–90%. So we were proud to contribute, and for some years, we didn't hear about this anymore. Now we are again completely in the nitrogen situation, and we call it even the nitrogen crisis. That has a different background. This is related to the nature regulations. It is related to that in the year 2000, Nature 2000 areas were assigned in the European Union. A very good initiative to make Europe, to keep Europe somewhat green. Many of those areas were proposed. It seems to be that there are almost 27,000 of those sites. In our country, we have about, I think, about 170, often very small sites. Nature experts selected those, and we were, of course, proud to present our areas. And we didn't realize at that moment what it meant later on. The goal was to protect nature. And in our area, it is translated more or less to that we want to reduce, that we need to reduce to protect nature, the nitrogen precipitation on those nature areas, on those Nature 2000 areas. That's not everywhere in Europe the same. It's not the only factor affecting nature, of course. Also water availability and so affects it very much. But here, Europe has its guidelines, and then each country fills it in with its own regulations to follow those common targets from Europe. And we fill it in especially with nitrogen. Because the idea is that certain rare plants in our small nature areas are not nitrogen minded, so they are in danger. Plants like nitrogen in general, but some not, and that is the problem. Our Environmental Institute made the next summary of where nitrogen comes from, and then you see in our country it's more than 40% from animal manure. Some from traffic, that's nitrogen oxide. Industry, usually nitrogen oxide, and that makes it difficult, about 1/3 comes somewhere from the air, from outside the country, and a little bit from the sea. What is very much in discussion in our regulations is that how does ammonia precipitate? How close to the source? If you have a farm with manure, we always assumed it would fall down within about 20–25 kilometers. That could indicate that you cannot have nature within 25 kilometers or 20. Otherwise, nature is there, so you cannot have the farm within that range. And that's a big issue. At the moment, there's some discussion about where that ammonia falls down. Some studies indicate that it is much closer to the farm, but whatever. In our country, it led And that was the start of our, what we call nitrogen crisis. It started in 290 when an environmental group went to the High Court, the juridical court, and they argued that the government should take more care of nature areas, looking at the legislation of ourselves and the main target of the European Union. But especially they looked at regulations we made to achieve that goal. And the courthouse agreed that we could do a better job in our country. And that resulted in the next guidelines, or guidelines that are imposed, that we have a maximum nitrogen deposition of 0.7 grams per hectare per year allowed for each economic activity. So that means if you build a house or you build a farm or you extend the farm, you are not allowed to exceed this limit. Of course, then the distance to the nature area becomes extremely important, and we have a model to calculate that. Somewhat interesting is that in other countries, they have also a kind of this approach, but they have different limits. In Germany, it's about 100, Denmark from 200 to 700. But there are reasonings behind that, and often they are understandable. Why such big differences? It resulted in our country in, again, the nitrogen crisis, in all construction projects that were 18,000 had to stop, which exceeded this limit, or which would exceed this limit. Actually, it meant that almost all projects stopped. And we got a minister for nitrogen, just to handle the nitrogen issue. There was a map published in which each person, and especially farmers, when it is more for farmer use, could see in which region they belong and how much we thought that the government thought the reduction should be for that particular region and for that farm. And as you can see, the more colored parts, the reductions are between about 50 and 90%. Green areas, that is most close to our nature areas, it was, it's almost 90%. That was very, alarming for the sector, but it was for a good goal, a greener environment. Anyway, it raised several questions, and the questions are also a bit, have to do with science. If you look, for instance, one question was, just to give you an impression how much discussion this can give, if you look at the islands at the top, that are beautiful islands where we have vacation and so, they are all green. That means we need 90% reduction in nitrogen precipitation. But people noticed on some of the islands, one island does not have animals and does not have traffic. It's all not allowed. And then asking for that and finding out why it needs so much reduction, the explanation is that there is also nitrogen coming from the sea to the island. Some from the air, but from the sea. So in such an area, animal sector is not involved. It is just other factors which are already too much. To give you another example, if you have two dogs walking in a nature area, the reality is that if they poop a few times, that's really too much. That's too much to cover a correct environment. So this is quite a big discussion and how we can deal with this. It led to protests. It led now also to partly that we need a new government. So it's a big thing. For the farming community, especially the animal farming community, especially also dairy, because dairy is not only into the topic of nitrogen, manure, but also in greenhouse gases. So dairy is more on the front page these days. That means that it is very regular, this issue described in the papers, so we all communicate about it widely. Presently, there is a program to buy out about 3,000 farms close to nature areas. It is not necessarily only dairy farms, it can also be pig poultry farms. We call it peak polluters. And that's, of course, quite a strong word, peak polluters. There is an ammonia deposition limit set. I already talked about that limit. And we have a model, areas model, used by institutes. And even Paul has a project in which he tries it at the moment at farm level. Well, it is at farm level for this calculation. Each farmer himself can calculate if his ammonia falls down on the nature area and if it is above the limit. So it comes very close to the farmer. He can even check himself and then he can report himself to the government. Scientifically, the areas model is interesting. I think it was more meant for general calculations, more for model calculations to make policies. But now we use it on individual farm, and that raises questions. Does such a model also apply to a very specific situation? So that is now actually more and more in discussion. I come back to that at the moment. We talk mostly about ammonia. Manure is the issue. Well, we have manure enough. Actually, this manure even was during a visit in Italy, and they have it everywhere. And it is a useful substance, but in this discussion, it has a different name. Then we have methane. It becomes more and more an issue, and that comes mainly from ruminants. 75% comes out of the mouth of ruminants. An observation is, which we had in our project, and we had several, that we found that when we work with farmer groups, as we do, that it is often difficult to distinguish between practices which are for ammonia or which are for methane. To be honestly, I think it is often confused. But they are surely different. Right? One practice does apply to ammonia and another to methane, but not often to both. And it would be wonderful if they apply to both. So we look very much for that. And the principle is different. Ammonia is more, you can work with it more in a chemical way because it attaches to acid. And that's what we do in the pig and poultry buildings where we have acid filters. And that works quite well. And the ammonia is taken off the air. And then we have the enzyme, the phytase, which plays a role. It all is more chemical processes. With methane, that is very robust, and we cannot do much with chemistry or so. That is more microorganisms. So when we want to block methane development, we need to block the microorganisms who cause that. So it are different principles, different practices, often different things. And sometimes they work even opposite, unfortunately. We measured on 40 climate care cattle farms over Europe, the methane content in the barns, and we found 20 to 80 ppm, milligram per cubic meter. And we notice now we study that is low. It is very low to work with that and to, for instance, to filter it or to oxidize it. It's low. So at the moment we work, but that's more still in research, with all kinds of ventilation techniques to realize a higher concentration of methane, because then we can catch it, then we can work with it. But at the moment, it's very complicated. The picture you see is even from this university. We had just a PhD student who finished her research on it. And there we tried to catch the air from the cows, from the head of the cows, by a kind of, we call it heads, but the cows are behind plastic, and we filter the air there, we suck the air. Anyway, this is still a bit theory, but we work on it, because we need solutions. Finally, very important actually, our country, and that's pretty general, I think that's from farmer side, from political side, if possible, we would like to go and to change a bit the approach to all these, to dealing with environment emissions especially, and also leaching. At the moment, we call it the regulations that are regulations which are based on means. And we would like to go more to regulations that look more at the purpose, the target. To explain it, at the moment, we work with means regulations. That means, and Paul will tell about it in a second, we certify certain floor types that are emission poor, or manure facilities. We cover the manure pits, that is emission poor. Or for methane, very much there is, and it will happen that we feed substances like BOFA that reduces methane. That is all more or less prescribed practices. And they accumulate. The government just tells the farmer more and more which practices to use. For instance, we have at the moment also the practice that you should harvest the potatoes before 1st of September, or perhaps it's 1 October. Those kind of things. So the farmer is completely told how to handle his farm. Actually, farmers don't like it, but it is also a very tiring situation. We would like more targets. That means, for instance, we have in Europe 50 milligram nitrate per liter water as a maximum. That's fine. Why not assign a certain ammonia emission quota to each farm? And if you have those targets, then we would like the farmer to fill it in himself. Whatever practice helps. This is very much, people are in favor of it, but we don't manage yet to fill it in so well, because also if the farmer has a certain target, we need still a control that he is actually achieving that target. And therefore at the moment there is a lot of work done on trying to find sensors on farm level which can measure and control those targets. Like what is now the emission in the farm regularly, such that the policy people trust it and that it is that it is reliable. So changing from telling the farmer exactly what to do to having targets which the farmer can fill in themselves. That is our ideal future picture. Paul will continue with telling about those, the first approach, how we certify and work on all kinds of technical practices, which actually the farmer often obligatory has to apply. I would just like, and Paul will not talk so much about it, but there is also an approach possible which is not so much on farm level, but more central. And we visited lately also, for instance, Denmark. And then we are quite impressed how they approach it completely different. They build all the time big biogas plants, and they just take the manure from the farm and transport it to these big facilities. A different approach than we have, but yeah, and they tell us that at the moment they already provide 30% of the gas from these plants, and they want to go to 90, 100%. This is at least a huge number of knowledge centralized, while in our country we usually want all that knowledge on one particular farm. To conclude, the situation is that there is a continuous and most focus, I think, is and will stay on animal welfare. And that will not go away. That's a huge issue. Reducing ammonia emissions to air and water is surely priority these days in parts of Western Europe and elsewhere. I believe it is solvable. We will manage. Methane reduction, yeah, that's a challenge to work on, especially for sectors with open barns, as for dairy, and so on. We should look for integrated solutions because sometimes those practices just work oppositely for methane and ammonia. And now we usually concentrate on one and a bit later on another. We experience in our country that researchers certify a certain application like floors in barns. There is a certain reduction percentage, but then a few years later, another group of researchers checks it in practice, and they found out that it is just a bit less. It's not 35%, but 30%. And we notice it's very confusing to the society, and it gives a lot of discussion. And in the juridical court, it's a huge problem. Because if you have those complete different percentages, nobody believes you anymore. That's a problem in our country. And I'm sure it will be a problem in other countries to come if it's already not there. We like to go from mean regulations to purpose regulations. Again, certification of sensors and methods, yeah, that's increasingly important because we need to prove in the courthouse more and more that our solutions work. And that will, I think, only increase in the future because you see it, yeah, all the time more happening. And till now, often agriculture or the government loses in the courthouse. So that is a huge topic for the future, how to guarantee that you achieve what you promised to achieve. I give the floor to Paul, who will tell, I hope he will even tell how to solve this.
Abele, thank you very much. And thank you for being with us to hear about the problems and the solutions we are working on in our country, the Netherlands. I'm Paul Dalema, also working at Wageningen Livestock Research. So I will go into the environmental challenges, mostly on ammonia emissions. And I would like to start with this picture. Abele already mentioned the problems we have to deal with. And we are living in a small country with 18 million people. And the influence of the public, of the society is increasing. Like the topics Abele mentioned about environmental topics. Also the regulation about animal welfare will increase. Leaching of nitrogen, these topics. And the picture of the Netherlands you see here is that we also have discussion what are the best areas for more intensive land-based dairy farming and more extensive land-based. And if you are close to a nature area, we have about more than 160 nature areas, you have to extensify. So that means a lower stocking rate, lower inputs of concentrates and fertilizing. And that's mostly the parts in the south and in the east. These are the farms close to nature areas. And in the north and in the west of the Netherlands, there is more room for intensive land-based. So the challenge is to combine the reduction in emissions with land use planning. And of course, this has impact for the existing farms. Now, I will go into these topics. I will tell about solutions, how to improve the nutrient efficiency. There are several farm tools in different countries, and we use in the Netherlands, we call it the ANCA tool, Annual Nutrient Cycle Analyze tool. Then I will focus more on how much reduction is possible with the several solutions to reduce ammonia emissions. And I will go into some research topics, innovations about housing systems, but looking at the whole manure chain. So I will also go into the effect of housing systems on manure products and the quality of the manure products coming out of the different systems. So there are several farm assessment tools. Like in Scotland, they use the AgriCalc tool. In France, they use the Cap d'Ugère tool, and we use the ANCA tool. And those tools can look at greenhouse gas emissions or also ammonia emissions. And it can calculate measures about the animals, grazing, housing, storage, spreading. And I will focus more on especially on housing, but also a bit on feeding. So we use the ANCA tool, which looks at the input from to the animals from buying feed from outside, and we look at soil level, which is influenced by the input of fertilizer from outside. So there is different research going on in all these part of the circle, nutrient circle. So the ANCA tool, that's a tool which is used at all the 14,000 dairy farms in the Netherlands. It's obligatory. And it gives insight in the efficiency of nitrogen, phosphor, and carbon on the level of animal, soil, but also on farm level. And you get insight about the crop production and about the pollution to the soil, so the leaching of nitrogen, but also to the air, ammonia emission and greenhouse gas emissions, and the water quality. So it's an important tool which gives a lot of information, and all the dairy farms have to use this tool. And last year, we analyzed data from 12,000 of those farms, and we looked at if you take ammonia emission per hectare, which variables have the most impact on emission per hectare. And we looked at 47 variables, and I will show the most important one. Of course, is the intensity, and is how many cows per hectare and the milk production per cow. That's of course the more intensive, the more emission per hectare. But the second one is how much manure do you apply on your field. And in the Netherlands at this moment, we have a derogation. So that means that 250 kilogram of nitrogen per hectare is allowed. But like Abele showed that the leaching of nitrogen is increasing. So we lose the derogation. That means we have to go back to 170 kilogram nitrogen per hectare. And that has a big impact at the dairy farms at this moment, because they have to export it to arable farmers or another way. But the amount of nitrogen per hectare has an impact on ammonia emission per hectare. And the third one, that's also important, the crude protein in the diet, in the total diet, that means for milking cows and young stock, has also a big impact on the emission per hectare. And the fourth one is the low emission systems. The housing systems, of course, also have an impact on ammonia emission per hectare. So this is based on the regression analysis on 12,000 dairy farms. Now I will focus on the crude protein in the diet. We have an agreement between the government and the dairy sector to reduce the crude protein in the diet to 160 in 2025. So that's next year. And last year it was about 163. So it is still too high. There's an agreement to go to 160. And I'm also project leader of a project with 150 dairy farmers to see is it possible to go a little bit lower to 155 gram protein, crude protein per dry matter. And there are also 45 farm guiders involved. So it's a learning network with a lot of discussions about how to do this. If I go to some results of those 150 farms, they are grouped into 9 classes based on 3 soil types: clay ground, peat ground, and sand soils, and also based on intensity. So the extensive farming systems have less than 14,000 milk per hectare, and the intensive farms have more than 20,000 milk per hectare. And the average is in between. And what you see on this picture is that the farms on the sandy soils, it's easier to reach the target of 155 crude protein, and the peat ground is a little bit more difficult. That's also because the nitrogen coming from the soil. And the intensive farmers is also a little bit easier because the intensive farmers, they grow more maize on sandy soils especially. And if you can buy maize or grow maize, it's easier to get that target. So that was about crude protein. That's a big project. And there is also research going on to stimulate grazing, not only to reduce ammonia emission, and of course also because the society wants our cows outside, but it also helps to reduce ammonia emission. And we also have research on our research farm and on commercial farms about dilution with water. That's what you see on the picture on the left. That's a slatted floor, and we add about 70 liters per cow per day water to reduce ammonia emission, and that will reduce it about 35%. And you need quite a lot of water because your manure storage will almost double. So it is a good solution, but you need enough manure storage, and of course you need enough water. But we have a lot of ditches in the Netherlands. Yeah. Another big topic is working on low emission floors, but also we also are looking with companies for new techniques about manure application to reduce ammonia emission. And we think that if you take into account feeding, grazing, dilution with water, and floor types and manure application, you can reduce it with 50 to 70%. You can reduce ammonia emission. This is another learning network with a group of farmers. There are 110 farmers involved, and this is not only looking at feeding, but also at housing systems and in relation to ammonia emission, but also to greenhouse gases and water quality and biodiversity. It's a network of 110 farmers. 18 of them we do intensive research, 18 research farms. We measure feeding, the feed intake, feed efficiency. We measure emissions in the barns, and to check the feasibility and the applicability. And we also have 22 demonstration farms who the advisors are involved to fine-tune those measures, and we have 70 ambassadors. One of the research farms is it is commercial farms, but also research farm De Marke. The picture you see over here is that we do an online measurement about ammonia emission in the stable, online measurements. So every day we know ammonia emission, methane emission, and we see at the market that the ammonia emission is about 60% lower than average. And that's not only the floor, but also the crude protein in the diet is about 140, between 140 and 145 at this farm. And they add also a little bit water on the solid floor to reduce the ammonia emission. Now I will go into some research we are doing at our research farm Dairy Campus. That's a research farm with 500 cows, and this is a unit. These are 7 units of 16 cows where we compare different housing systems and measure the emissions of ammonia and greenhouse gases. What the picture you see is that if we to measure ammonia emission and greenhouse gas emission, it's important to know the airflow. So and that's why we have mechanical ventilation, and so we know exactly how much air is coming into the building and how much is going out of the building, and so we can calculate emissions. And several floor types are tested at Dairy Campus, but also on commercial farms, like the meadow floor you see here, like the green flag floor. And there are all kinds of floors who separate the phases in urine with concrete floors, with asphalt floors or rubber floors. But these emission factors are also in discussion because the network I just showed with the 18 research farms, we see that some floors have a higher emission than we expected, but there are also some floors who are even better than we expected. But that means they are in discussion. And the emission factor is very important for a farmer to get permission for his housing system. If a company wants to introduce a new floor type, he has to follow a protocol of 6 measurements on each farm, and each farm, that means 4 farms 6 times a year, or do measurements at Dairy Campus and 2 commercial farms. And then you, based on those research, they can get an emission factor. And that's important to get permission from the local government. This is research on a new type of floor. We call it a permeable floor. It are plates you put on a slatted floor. In the Netherlands, we have mostly slatted floor in the manure store that it's underneath. If you put a plate on it, you can separate the urine from the phases, and that can reduce the ammonia emission. So the urine will get through the plate into the storage, and a robot or a scraper can pick up the phases. And we have tried out several treatments of the urine in the plate, and the reduction is between 40 to 50%. We have tried adding with spraying with water and adding a urease inhibitor, and we also see that the ammonia emission from the urine can be very high, and you can reduce it by adding acid, sulfuric acid. So it's important that you have to do something with the urine to reduce it. Now this is a permeable plate. We also did research on the cow toilet, what you see on this video. This is a cow toilet. It's a combination with a concentrate feeder. You see that the toilet is touching the nerve between the tail and the udder, and then she starts urinating. So you see it really works. And we can collect about 35% of the urine production, and that's about 12 liters. And the reduction of ammonia emission is about 35. And so this is a technique which is being introduced now in the Netherlands, and it's important to get an emission factor for this technique. Now I will go into the manure quality. different housing systems with different separation techniques give different manure products. And you can also have a technique to treat those products to add some value. And I will go into what's the quality in terms of soil improver or as a fertilizer. If you look at cubicle barns and free walk barns, there are different housing systems. So you can separate phases in urine, like I showed with the permeable plate and the cow toilet. There are other techniques who are sucking the air from the manure storage to lower the ammonia emissions. That gives also different manure products. We also see that in the Netherlands that we see that one farmer or a group of farmers are using fresh manure for a digester and also strip the if you then the digestate separate with mechanical separation in phases in urine, you can also strip the urine. I will show an example. In a free walk barn, that's a barn without cubicles. We have two different systems. We have a composting bedding with wood chips, and we have that's a new development that we have sand bedding which separate the phases and urine. This picture is the technique of sucking the air from the manure storage, that from the company Lely Sweer. And what you see in the picture on the left, we have a slatted floor. There are strips in the holes of the slatted floor that the urine will get through, and the robot picks up the phases, and the urine will get into the storage. And then an air sucking technique is taking the air out of the storage, and then you get different manure products. I will show in this picture. So you have in the storage, you have a liquid with a lot of potassium. The nitrogen is sucked out of the air with the Lely Sweer system, and then you get a manure product which is called ammonium sulfate with a lot of nitrogen in it, and the robot picks up the phases, which is a manure fraction with a lot of phosphor in it. So you have three manure products, and the Lely Sweer, the ammonia emission will be more than 70% reduction. So that's quite a lot. So this is an important development in our country. These are two examples which I see in different commercial farms. On the left, you see we have different floor types in the Netherlands to separate the phases and the urine. And then if you have the phases, you have to make a decision, how can I make the phases stackable, so you can apply it easier on the field. And on the left, this farmer is adding straw to the phases to make it stackable, and then store it in a silage with a plastic cover on it. And that means you fermentate the phases. It's an anaerobic process. So you have two manure products, the urine in the manure storage, and you have the fermented phases. That's the other manure product. But instead of adding straw, and that's on the right side, because straw is very expensive, I see that more farmers are not adding straw, but make it stackable by a separator. So if the urine and phases are coming out of your housing system, the phases, they use a separated, and then you get the solids as a manure product, and the liquid from the separator and the urine from the floor are put together in a bag or a liquid storage. So you have 4 manure products. Then this is called Jumpstart. That's a project from Friesland Campina, the dairy sector. and they are stimulating digesting. And we have examples that farmers also try to do it with a group of farmers. And after you are digesting the manure, the manure has to be fresh manure. They separate it to solids and a liquid fraction. And then the liquid fraction, you can use a nitrogen stripper, we call it, a nitrogen stripper to get the nitrogen out of it. So you get a manure product which is called digistaat, that's coming from the digester, and from the separator you get solids, and you get an effluent from the stripper. And okay, that was some examples from the cubicle barn. Now I focus on the free walk barn, and you see here on the left that's a free walk barn with fresh wood chips. If you compost it with the manure and the urine of the cattle, after a year, you have a nice compost product you see on the right side. And we have measured that the ammonia emission is about 30% less. That means that the bacteria in the compost bedding are fixing a lot of nitrogen. But on the other hand, the methane emission is higher. You add a lot of carbon by the wood chips, and yeah, that gives also a methane emission. So that's a wood chip barn. We have about 60 free walk barns in the Netherlands with this system. These are two examples. If you want to digest manure, you have to remove the slurry immediately from the barn. On the left side, you see an example of the separation of feces and urine floor type. And on the right side, that's a free walk barn with organic material. And there is a farmer in the Netherlands who is using that machine. It's called a bedding cleaner that picks up the feces together with the organic material and then brings it to the digester. The organic material as bedding is very expensive, but he says if I can also use it in the digester, it will. I will also have more profit from my digester. So that's a combination of bedding and digesting, and this is a new development. There are a few farmers in the Netherlands who are using the bedding cleaner, what you see on the left side, on a sand bedding, and sand can separate also feces from urine. The urine will get through the sand bedding and the feces are picked up by this machine. And then finally, if you look at the quality of the different manure products, you can look at which housing system, which manure products are a good soil improver. For example, the free walk housing system with the wood chips is a very good soil improver because you have a lot of organic matter in your system. We also looked at organic fertilizer, and in our country, I call it a renewer. A renewer means the reuse of nitrogen from manure. Some farmers are looking at, can we make a chemical fertilizer from our manure, because we lose the derogation. So that means we have to go from 250 kilogram nitrogen from manure to 170. But is it possible to make a renewer, and so it will be more a chemical fertilizer? That means you can save a lot of money by less export of your manure. And which products are interesting for renewal? For example, the cow toilet, you get urine and you get slurry with less urine in it. And urine, the cow toilet is a very good separator, and that means that the urine could be seen as a renewer. But if you look, for example, look at also the sand bedding. The sand bedding is also a very good separator, and that means that the urine from the sand bedding is also could be a good chemical fertilizer. But if you have all those floor types with asphalt, concrete, or rubber, it's not always that separation is not good enough to be a renewer. Yeah. So at the end, I would summarize with these take-home messages. We are doing research to lower the emissions. I focused the most on ammonia emission, but it is also important for greenhouse gases. That good management, these are the cheapest solutions, like less crude protein in the diet, more grazing, and manure management in the barn, the storage, and also good management using the right technique to bring it to the field. And the second take-home message is we are also working on more high-tech solutions like the digesting, stripping. The Lely sphere is also a high-tech technique. It is possible to reduce emissions, but also to make interesting manure products to optimize the fertilizer. And at the end, we are working on developments, especially on new floor types in the cubicle barns, like the permeable plate I showed, but also on new bedding materials in free walk barns. So this was the end of my presentation. Thanks for your attention. I'm not sure if there is room for questions, but maybe.
The idea is that if you have questions, please put it on the chat. And we may have time, but I don't think so, but we will surely answer them afterwards. We invited 3 people to reply and to tell a little bit from their viewpoint. Also because we realized that, yeah, Paul and I am very much talking from the Netherlands, and there is much more in the world. So perhaps somebody, I would like to invite Trevor Atkinson, who is president of the International Farm Management Association, IFMA, if he can give a little reply from perhaps more an international perspective and tell us that we are only from the Netherlands. Trevor?
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? Yep.
Yep.
Good. Well, first and foremost, I'm a farmer, not a researcher, so a lot of my opinions are based on practical experience and what we're doing. But the reason I've been asked today is to sort of put an international representation on the 2 papers we've just listened to. And I think just taking a step back, it's sort of climate change is starting to make us realise as farmers that we need to be far more responsible with the inputs that we're using, in particular fertiliser and fuel. Both of those have given rise to much complacency in the Western world in that we've got food aplenty and at a relatively low cost. But we're now starting to look at the negative impacts of fertilisers and fuels, and increasingly our consumers, because of climate change, we're going to have to put them into the equation when we work out our production formulas. If we can navigate our way through this and recalculate our formulas, then agriculture, I believe, can be a big part of the solution, and we shouldn't necessarily think that it is all negative. With a combination of high input prices, falling output prices, a warming climate and politics, there's little wonder that the pressures in the industry are boiling over. Hence the farmer protests we're currently seeing right the way across Europe and probably elsewhere in the world as well. Farmers in particular, by definition, are fairly resilient characters. They do not like change. They like producing food and they like feeding the communities. They do not like the idea that food production processes are killing the planet, and that much of the medicine prescribed appears to be about higher cost and reducing production. And I don't think that sits well, which I think has been alluded to already. IFMA are very grateful to be invited to join you today. One of the many benefits we have within the IFMA network is that we have an access of an international network of agriculturalists, and that gives us many different viewpoints. And I think that does help to try and keep us all slightly more balanced and not too entrenched in any one position. Each year we produce a booklet of country reports, which the purpose behind that is to give a feel for the issues the agricultural industry is facing around the world. I thought it would be useful just to sift through those country reports to see what issues I could pull out that were more in line with today's topics. So if we go to New Zealand, it's a big agricultural exporting country, and they've been asked, the farmers there have been asked to take land out of production and plant trees. Climate change impacts of agriculture and the primary sector very firmly in the spotlight with the government, and they're trying to sort out an agreement as to how to take things forward. As I understand it, it's still at a standoff position, which if that maintains through to the end of this next year, my understanding is that they will be taxed at the processor level for each unit of production, and there won't be any compensation or reductions for any carbon sequestration in the production process. So big issues in New Zealand, but again, it's looking at land out of production and affecting the farming income. If we look at Brazil, they mentioned the word sustainable intensification as their major line of research, which is underway concerning livestock production. Their lower average productivity in agriculture in livestock and low uptake of technologies make room for significant improvements without any extra pressure on land. In fact, they would argue that if they actually intensified the livestock more, that would release land for more crops or more timber production. But at the same time, they are acknowledging that decarbonisation of farming systems is essential. If we go to Canada, we see that they're committed to net zero emissions by 2050. The aim is to reduce nitrous oxide and methane emissions to 30% the level that they were in 2020 by the time we get to 2030. The government have made it clear that the fertiliser and methane emission reduction goals are voluntary and have committed to supporting farmers with cost sharing and incentivising programmes. But what they're finding there is that the agri-retailers are increasingly requiring farmers to meet their sustainability standards, more so on the environmental side, in order to sell their products. So farmers are frustrated with the lack of recognition of the farming's historical and ongoing contribution to the ecological goods and services that they supply. Farmers therefore worried about the effects of the government's and environmental sustainability goals on food security and in particular on their financial bottom lines. In America, one of the other reports we run was a hands-on report, and we had a girl who was from a big dairy farm in New York State, and she was spending most of her time trying to reconnect the producer with the consumer and also with politicians. And a big issue was that the politicians don't understand farms, they just regard them as dirty production processing places. And she was spending a lot of time just trying to get a balanced message across as opposed to being the victims. They were also under a lot of pressure for the amount of water they were using. I think they were actually tankering water in from the north to actually meet their water requirements. So again, the environmental pressures and this lack of a consistent message, if you like, between consumers, producers and politicians, big issues in America. If we go to Japan, the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestries and Fisheries there developed a strategy for sustainable food systems in 2021. They were targeting major environmental outcomes by 2050. And this includes their agriculture being carbon neutral, reductions in the use of chemical pesticides by 50% and reductions of fertiliser by 30%. They were also looking to expand the organic farming sector to over 1 million hectares. So again, it's focusing on reducing production. So that takes us back to the UK. Spotlight is very much on the dairying sector in the UK from an emissions point of view, but we're also very interested in the potential the dairy sector has to help sequester large amounts of carbon into grassland through better soil management and better manure management. And I think this is a key area where UK agriculture can present itself as part of a solution, and challenge the critics, if you like, of the livestock products. There's still a lot to learn on this. We're sort of playing about with it. We need to change our thinking from where we've been. We're moving on to more sort of herbal lays and the benefits they're bringing to nutrition, but we need to know how to conserve those. So lots of work going on in those sort of sectors. Then we also have a lot of work being done by the UK, by the milk processors. They're collecting large amounts of data from farms. They've made it clear that there's no single dairy system, whether that be housed, grazing, organic or robotic, is clearly environmentally any better than any of the others. But as in the case in Canada, we're increasingly being told by the processors that unless we can demonstrate that we're making an effort to reduce our carbon footprints, it becomes increasingly harder for them to sell our product. So, the premiums are there for those that want to listen to them. If you don't want to listen to them, then the premiums aren't there and the price is going down. So we still come back. I mean, one of the Paul's final comment was about a well-run or well-managed farm is still a large part of the key to lowering the environmental impact. And I think one thing that we're becoming increasingly aware of in the UK is that we need to actually bring the industry together more and share knowledge and look at different solutions, but circulate that and learn from each other a lot more. Whereas traditionally, I think we've tended to be quite insular in the way we approach things. Health and welfare, as we've mentioned, there's a big correlation between the farms with the healthiest cows and those with the lowest carbon footprints. Whether that's coincidence, I know not, but the fact is it's there. There's also talk of yield per rumen, in that a cow that's producing 6,500 litres will probably have very much the same environmental footprint as a cow producing 7,000 litres. And therefore, if we can increase the yield by 500 litres, then the carbon footprint per litre of milk, if you like, is reduced. Again, it depends on the type of system that you're on, I think, on that. The other big area that there's a lot of attention going into it is on the breeding, the genetics. There's various companies now that are offering genetic indexes that focus solely on breeding cows for environmental credentials. There's a new technology being pioneered by ST Genetics, which is trying to map genes for increasing feed conversion efficiencies, etc., which could ultimately transform the reduction of dairy carbon footprint. So we wait to see on that. We're using a lot more sex semen now, and that's enabling us to faster generational intervals, so we can sort of speed up the breeding cycles where we find traits that we think we should be looking for. And then there's also the rumen methane production. That there's various schools of thought that think that can be manipulated by genetic selection as well. So in terms of our little dairy farm in Northumberland, we are working very closely with our milk processor, to monitor our carbon footprint. We're growing and feeding much more home-produced protein and grains, so we're trying to cut down any food coming in onto the farm. We're growing a lot more herbal lays, all with low input nitrogen programs, for both grazing and for forage, along with cover crops that we're rotating, or we're trying to rotate back into an arable crop rotation. And I do see this as the one big opportunity going forward, is that whether it's back to the future or not, I'm not sure, but you know, we know full well that our carbon content of the soils on the arable rotations compared to the dairy rotations, we're probably 2 to 3 times higher on the dairy than where we are on the arable. And what we're trying to do now is to bring rotational livestock back into that rotation to try and improve carbon and soil contents. The housing of cows, I mean, we struggle to get investment. I appreciate all the work that you guys are doing, but the answer for us at the moment is we're moving more to spring calving. So, you know, the animals will spend much more time outside. At the same time, I think we've said it for years that we treat slurry as a fertilizer, but I think only now we're starting to, particularly with the high fertilizer prices, we're probably treating it with the same respect as a bought-in product. You know, we're using precision technology to apply it far more scientifically than whatever we've done before. Sex semen I've already mentioned, and we're spending a lot more time on staff training and animal welfare and attention to detail. Now, that strategy will produce less food units per unit of area farmed, and as a farmer that goes against the grain, but equally I am a businessman and it's a formula that is financially sustainable. You know, it will pay the rent and put the wages and put a roof over our head. Now, how does that fit with producing less food? I'm not sure. You can argue that in the Western world, probably too many calories rather than too few is the problem. I've never experienced food shortages in my lifetime, but when you bring all that information together from around the world, you can see food production going down, not up. And I do put a question mark against that as to how that all works out. Perhaps the answer is that if the rest of the food chain start and look at the consequences of food wastage and the emissions and footprints from that, perhaps they'll become more efficient, and that will help resolve lower food production. So in summary, I do think we have to be careful we don't let agriculture become the newspaper headline scapegoat for all greenhouse gas emissions. Only yesterday I read an article calling for a 90% reduction in animal-based food products. And whilst every food and farming system will have an environmental impact, we need to make sure we get our message over clearly, supportively, it's informative. I accept that's no easy challenge, but I think we do have to acknowledge we've got a lot to do on communications to truly represent ourselves. I saw a statistic the other week that said that greenhouse gas emissions on the single passenger on the long haul flight to Sydney is equivalent to 9.5 years of beef consumption. Yeah, we see more articles in the press about giving up meat eating than we ever do about reducing air travel. And that's, you know, that's the message we've got to get over. So I thank Wageningen for all the work they're doing and resilience for dairy. We've heard about today, it's all vitally important. If collectively as the food industry we can demonstrate greater responsibility for both the positive benefits and the negative impacts of all the inputs we use in, this has to be a big step forward. So I think from a farmer's point of view, we have to keep listening rather than resisting these messages and manage the business accordingly. And if we do that, agriculture can be a big part of the solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. You took us in a few minutes all over the world. Happily, you finished in England. That's a good place to be, I guess. Thank you very much. We turn on quickly to the east of Europe, Eastern, and Adam Cieslak from Potsdam. He is part of the European project Climate Care Cattle Farming. So we have all kinds of inputs. And you will shortly tell a little bit more from Central Europe. To you the floor, Adam.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you see my presentation?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, great. At the beginning, maybe I would like to thank you very much for having me here. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here, and I shortly want to present some current situation in Poland in case of the environmental database of agriculture. And as mentioned by Paul, we attend in a climate care cattle farming project, and 8 farms from Poland representing various scale of production participate in this project. And when we see just in case of our dairy sector, we can see that our dairy sector are very different in case of the production. Generally in Poland, we have a lot of small farms. Maybe it's not seen on the picture, but we have almost 174,000 dairy farms, and only 80,000 farms are involved in the milk production recording system. But these farms just produce the 40% of whole milk production. This slide just present a different part of building, different part of barns. As you see on the left side is a very small barn where usually keep the small number of cows, and another just picture show more modern farm. And also I have a picture with some kind of vacuum, let's say, for the feces which are installed in a new barn. And last Friday it was opening ceremony for new cows. And now I would like to present some current trends in our countries. We have some kind of changes, big changes, let's say, in case of the structure of dairy farms, because the small dairy farms are closing in case of the economic value, and also no successors, because young generation want to just work with other sectors instead of the small dairy farms. Also, we see in our country big farm robotization issue in case of problem with workers during the milking production process, and also in case of the increasing electricity prices. A lot of farmers just put efforts to use the renewable energy sources, mainly solar panels, but also the biggest farm just thinking about the biogas plants. And in case of the introducing of new EU regulation, our farmers just thinking how to do it. However, some support is needed, and maybe I just show later what's going on with this issue. Now I would like to present our agriculture sector, just using some results from our surveys, which we carried out with our farmers. Finally, we successfully did 55 surveys, and you have here just characterization of the size, the herd size of farms, dairy number of cows. As you see, the farmers has just farms from 5 hectares to 2,000, and for example, number of dairy cows from 8 to 1,000. And We asked many questions, including the question present here, and is just example of some question. And as you see on the slides, the question is just labeled on the black, and the answer of our farmers is just labeled on the red color. And when the farmer strongly agree, we just put 1, and when the farmers just strongly disagree, just put 5. And based on this question, we can say that our farmers have the obligation to contribute to environmental protection as much as possible, but sometimes individual farmers, is the question 4, cannot do anything to reduce greenhouse gas emission. And when we just conclude our surveys, we can say that a higher awareness characterizes Polish agriculture of greenhouse gases and ammonia emission than we assumed. And our farmers cannot use this knowledge, unfortunately, to counteract the negative effects of agriculture production on the environment. And we also can conclude that better implementation of the current farmers' knowledge requires finance, support, and education programs. Yesterday, we have a big protest. As you see on the map, we have more than 200 just places where our farmers just protested in case of different challenges from our farmers. And this slide just shows some issue in case of these challenges. And I should underline that is the largest protest in recent years, and the impetus was to import the grain from Ukraine, and lack of control quality, and our farmers had a problem with the solve the grain, and also another challenges for our farmers is just setting arable land aside and to improve animal welfare. I just want to underline that the welfare in our country is very well adjusted, but still we need some improvements. And just our farmers asking about the cost of such kind of activities. And also show that this kind of activities can increase the production cost. And also, hello?
Yeah,
Do you hear me?
It's okay.
Okay, great. And also it's just arise the question if whether EU society can afford to the Green Deal. It's a very big issue now in case of these protests, and our farmers just asking who just pay for such kind of activities. And Paul and Abel just show some information and about nitrogen decrease, but in our countries we just see that it's not a big issue, because the larger area of Poland just give us the opportunities just spread properly the manure in our lands. And another issue is just to create the emission calculator for dairy farms, because in case of the CC farming, we use 3 different tools, but sometimes these tools are not so useful in our farmers, and we still on the way for preparing such kind of emission calculator. And at the end, I just thank you again, and if you have any question, I'm open for answering. Thank you.
Adam, thank you for this impression from Poland. I think time-wise we continue, if you don't mind. Although one thing, the emission calculator you talk about is for greenhouse gases, I guess, huh?
Yes, for
Yeah,
us,
okay.
the same situation as Anka, NPC tools just we
Oh,
should use.
everything. Okay, that's a combination. And then
Yes.
we finalize the commands, the replies, and we go to Europe's Dairyland, Ireland. And George Ramsbottom will have the last contribution. He is from the European project Resilience for Dairy. And George, we can say that as the Netherlands, you are member of that, 15 countries involved. And the lead is by France, by Institut de l'Élevage. Valerie Brocard is our project leader. Please, George, you from this project who took the initiative to this webinar, please, to you the floor.
Thanks very much, Abele. Are you running my slides, Abele? You are.
Yeah.
Yeah. The first slide is gaseous emissions reduction. Is it the right slide, George?
No, it's not. There are 3 or 4 slides before that one, please.
Oh, sorry.
Paul.
Can we go back? Now
you're getting. Keep going.
Keep going.
This is a real spoiler, Abele.
I like this, but we go to the front.
Keep going, Abele. There's more slides, yeah.
Yeah, but Paul is always solving the problems here, not me, George.
This is not the first slide, no?
No, keep going. There should be more there. Okay.
Oh, I'm so happy that Paul is doing this.
I am so sad that he is doing it, Abele. Will I share?
Have you downloaded the presentation?
Will I share my own slides, even though we're missing the ability to present them in presentation format? We tried this earlier, Caroline. There we are. That's great. So listen, guys and girls, thanks very much for the opportunity just to bring you an Irish perspective, or mostly Irish perspective, on the environmental debate that's going on. My name is George Ramsbottom. I work with Teagasc. Teagasc is an advisory, research and education organization that we're based in Ireland. And I'm, as Abele has mentioned, myself, Paul and himself are part of the R4D project as well. So just move on to the next slide there, please, Paul. So what I did here was I said I pinched one of Abele's slides in terms of talking about the environmental focus that's going on in the Netherlands, and I said we could replace the word Netherlands by the word Ireland, because effectively all of the issues that Abele has discussed in his presentation earlier, and the trends that are happening around the move from production towards welfare to nitrates, emissions and biodiversity challenges, we may be 4 or 5 years behind the Netherlands in some of the challenges and issues that are arising, but they're increasingly becoming a great challenge for us in Ireland as well.
Yeah.
Next slide, please, Abele.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's the same stuff is coming in Ireland. So if we look at some of the headlines that are hitting the popular press in Ireland, in the Irish farming press, we have issues around, and I'm going to focus predominantly on gaseous emissions in Ireland, and also on our water nitrogen content, rather than focusing on a whole heap of the environmental challenges that we have. So if we look here at some of the headlines that have hit us recently, we've seen a decline, particularly in the use of fertilizer nitrogen in 2013. It's partly in response to the restrictions that have been put in place in Ireland. We've seen our derogation figures for most farmers in Ireland fall from 250 kilos of fertilizer nitrogen to 220 kilos of derogation nitrogen in the last couple of years. But secondly, it's probably also in truth part partly a response to the substantial rise that we've seen in fertilizer prices, particularly nitrogen, in the last couple of years. But that's reaching the head, that's making the headlines in Ireland. The second thing I put in there is about pressure on farmers to reduce cow numbers. Now, this may or may not be a voluntary call, but at the moment, we're still seeing an increase in the size of the national dairy herd. So it's in 1984, we stood at 1.5 million cows. It fell to 1 million by 2005 and has grown since quota removal back to around 1.6 million cows today. But there's a risk there that some of that national herd could well be lost if the environmental and legislation changes in the years to come, particularly around derogation, but also around issues to do with maybe a cap on greenhouse gases. So it's hitting the farming press in a big way. And the third one I put in is, and I heard Trevor mention it already, is kind of greater awareness by the processing industry in terms of achieving sustainability metrics in terms of the product that they produce. So, for example, one of our larger dairy processors in Ireland, Lakeland Dairies, has launched its sustainability incentive payments for farmers who engage in positive environmental actions on their farms to produce milk with a high environmental standard. And that's been replicated by a large number of both meat and milk processors throughout the country. Next thing there. And as Trevor alluded to, New Zealand, I'll also allude, go back there one, I'll also allude, just go back there a little bit, Apple, if you wouldn't mind, or Paul. So just reverse it there,
go back.
Paul. Yeah, perfect. Just leave it there, Paul.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
That's fine, you're grand. If we look at what Fonterra, the largest single processor of dairy product in New Zealand, is doing, they're aiming to cut farm emissions by 30% by 2030. And as Trevor alluded to as well, we've seen some farmers in New Zealand claim to have zero net emissions on beef and sheep farms. While the industry in Ireland has an emissions reduction of greenhouse gases of 50%, the agriculture industry has been set a target to achieve a 25% in a reduction in greenhouse gases in Ireland by 2030, which is a substantial challenge. Next slide there, please. And if we look at the reason for that, I suppose it's because agriculture is a huge industry in Ireland and accounts for 37% of gaseous emissions nationally. And we know that compared to many of our European counterparts, we're a livestock producing country. We have more cattle in the country than we have people, and we also have almost as many sheep in the country as we have people. So enteric fermentation of our greenhouse gases accounts for 57% of the warming potential of the gases produced. And the other two big ones are how we manage and spread our slurries and the emissions that come from agricultural soils after fertilizer is applied to them. So there's a big challenge in Ireland to reduce our gaseous emissions, and we have a target to achieve a 30% reduction by 2030. And I can say that in the last couple of years, we've seen our gaseous emissions start to decline, mainly as we adopt more positive agricultural practices and as we see a reduction in our artificial fertilizer input use. Next slide, please, Paul. So what I said I'd do is I just lay out the picture for gaseous emissions, and then I'd look at some of the actions that we're taking in Teagasc to try and help farmers along the process of reducing their emissions. And I do the same then for our river water as well. So if we look at the gaseous emission reduction, what are we doing as an organization to reduce those emissions? Well, we've 3 pillars to reduce gaseous emission in Teagasc. We've the signpost advisory program that I head up with a team of 21 advisors going around intensively dealing with large numbers of farmers to create plans for them to reduce their gaseous emissions. And in that space, Adam said that they haven't yet developed a calculator, while I heard Paul say that they have. We have a tool that will calculate our gaseous emissions, and it's called AgNav. And for each of these 10,000 farmers over the coming months, they'll know what their emissions figure is. And over the next year, in 2024, we plan to recruit 10,000 more farmers use AgNav for them, and then prepare sustainability plans for them as well. And we've a target that by 2030, we'll have 50,000 farmers out of a total farming population of 120,000 engaging with Teagasc and with the industry to reduce their gaseous emissions over the next number of years. The second part of our program is the development, let's go back there, Paul, for a second, is the development of a digital sustainability platform. And that's the platform that we're using to estimate people's greenhouse gas emissions. And it'll also indicate to them what their ammonia emissions are. That's the second part of the program. And to be honest, Abele, I was surprised or interested to hear about how important ammonia calculations and emissions reduction are in the Netherlands. It wouldn't quite have the same profile as either water quality, which is riverine water we're talking about, or greenhouse gas emissions reduction have been placed in Ireland at the moment. And the third component of, or pillar of climate action that we're working on in Teagasc is the creation of a national centre for agri-food, climate research and innovation. So we know that if farmers adopt the practices that we would encourage them to adopt at the moment, we can get about 2/3 of the way there to reduce their gaseous emissions. But we're dependent on our National Centre for Agri-Food to identify new practices and technologies that we can use, such as, for example, the use of inhibitors to reduce methane emissions to achieve some of the remaining greenhouse gases that we need to reduce in the coming years. Next slide, please, Paul. So the second one, polluter or a challenge we want to look at is in relation to river nitrogen levels for water quality. And I just put this map of most of Europe up here in terms of where we have challenges. So we can see across the Netherlands and Germany and parts of southern Spain, the Mediterranean countries, there are significant challenges there in terms of river quality. And it might seem that Ireland is in the better category, along with parts of northern Spain, some parts of Italy, and parts of mostly France and across the middle central Europe in terms of water quality. We just move around slightly there, Paul, please. But if we look more closely at Ireland, move on to, yeah, there we go. If you look at it more closely with Ireland, blue in this graph here represents pristine water or very high quality river nitrogen levels, very low levels of nitrogen in the rivers. And the yellow or green are less favorable areas. So while on average we have very good water quality in our rivers, there are areas of the country that are becoming more and more problematic. And I would say over the last 10 years, the water quality in rivers has at best stabilized, but hasn't really improved much. Next slide there, please, Paul. So with this in mind, Teagasc has developed a program called the Agricultural Sustainability Support and Advisory Program, or ASAP. And that program has 46 advisors who are dedicated to helping farmers improve the water quality. Of those advisors, 20 of them are directly employed by Teagasc. And you can see there the other organizations or the industry-wide organizations that are working with us. Some of them are employing ASAP advisors or water quality advisors as well, because it's been taken very, very seriously by the whole industry as a key issue for the environmental challenges that our farmers face. So the service is free, confidential and voluntary. And since 2018, they've focused on areas where water quality is of particular concern and have engaged and developed plans for 4,500 farmer participants. I also forgot to mention that on the greenhouse gas initiatives, we have both an advisory and a signpost program. So we have two elements to it. And the signpost program is funded by over 60 industry, private industry organizations as well. So just in summary then, Paul, if you go to my last slide, please. What I'm saying, last slide there, Paul.
Yeah,
please.
yeah.
Sorry, Paul, I'm getting impatient. I'm very, very rude. Sorry, Paul. So in terms of our environmental status, what we could say is that within Europe, have a relatively high level of higher environmental status from a greenhouse gas and emissions perspective and from a water quality perspective. But undoubtedly, we face significant challenges to maintain or improve that status in the years ahead. But I suppose on a positive note, we've adopted a whole of industry approach to try and rectify or improve the situation that we find ourselves in. And I have no doubt but that by adopting a whole of industry approach, we will succeed in the years ahead. Thank you very much, Paul and Abela, for the invitation to speak here today. I've thoroughly enjoyed your presentations and that of my other speakers, and I'm happy to take any questions that people might have afterwards.
George, thank you for this. Yeah, it's a kind of positive way you close this your presentation from the island of Ireland, because you tell us you have good hopes that you manage, and that's fine. I think Paul and I give the lead back to Caroline, because she is the boss, and anyway, we have not much time left, Caroline, right?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your interesting presentations. Yeah, actually, we are running out of time. Maybe we can answer shortly the few questions in chat. Can you see them?
No.
Abela and no? There was one remark, the first one from Neil Tirchat. I don't know if he's still here. In terms of economical aspects, do you also have data which compares the costs of the housing systems when it comes to manure management, return on investment, cost of products sold from manure?
Oh.
Yeah, well, that's why I mentioned that the first step is to take cheap measures like feeding, manure management. The high costs are the housing systems. So if you talk about the high investments, like a cow toilet, for example, the investment is about €1,000 per cow. And if you go to the lady swear system, that's somewhere around 1,300 investment per cow. So we always say to the farmers, start with the easy measures. And that's why we started crude protein as a big project, because every farmer can do that. And if you lower the crude protein with 1 gram per kilogram dry matter, it's also 1% lower ammonia emission. So housing systems are expensive. Yeah. Is that enough? Yeah.
Caroline, you have more?
I had some comments from Gary Thompson. He's also still in the meeting. As a farmer from the UK, I've looked at lily swear and other techniques. The problems are the capital costs and the running costs, as well as health and safety of assets on farm. Using a similar process and bubbling the slurry store gas through an algae bioreactor would solve a lot of these problems while creating a new industry from algae products. That's his opinion. I don't know if he has something else to add, then maybe he can just switch on his microphone. Otherwise, if there's some other questions or not?
Caroline, maybe to
Just first this one, and perhaps more first a general remark, I think from Paul and my side. You may have noticed that our contribution was quite a bit from the technical side. We did not really tell one topic, and that is the economic side. And in general, we can say that is probably the leading force for remarks from the farmers community. Okay? And it may be all over Europe and also in our country. I think the main issue is if you want more sustainable farming, and then Paul and Adam and George tell a lot about how it can be done, but it costs money. And so we had a discussion in our country between the Ministry of Agriculture and the farmers' organizations. It was a very intense 6 months discussion. If we change agriculture, how can we make a model, a business model of it? How can we still earn money? And they discussed that for 6 months, and it was really very intense. And unfortunately, it was broken up. And then also our government disappeared. So the discussion is still in the air. But I just want to say that topic we did not really raise from our side. But that's, of course, almost leading, with all those investments and all those ideas. How do you keep a living? That's all what I wanted to say. And actually, Trevor also touched that topic. How can you keep a living? And I think that's all over Europe, the issue a bit. Paul, the technical question we had from Mr. Just from Mr. Brown.
Yeah. Well, about the bioreactor he was asking, I think. And well, we have made several calculations for farmers about digesters. And there are several initiatives in the Netherlands that a group of farmers want to digest the manure and make green gas out of it. And it's only possible if you have fresh manure and if you have a big size, let's say more than 300, 400 cows. So that's why farmers try to work together to make it a business model. So we're not talking about co-digesting, but about manure digesting. And you need a big farm and you need fresh manure.
George, wanted to add something?
All I was going to say, Abele, is that for Ireland, we've developed what they call a marginal abatement cost curve. Some of our people in Johnstown Castle. And yes, there are quite a lot. I think there are 16 actions on it that will be needed to be fully implemented to achieve the kind of targets that have been set for Irish greenhouse gas emissions. But the majority of them, not all of them, but the majority of them are actually positive financially as well as rather than creating a cost. So yes, some of them are costly, but the majority aren't. And as I just want to go back to what Trevor said it near the start. Trevor said that good farming and good efficiency, carbon efficiency, generally go hand in hand, and I wholly agree with that. So, yeah, it's not all about cost. It's not all costly.
I think what also is important, the premium of the milk suppliers, the milk suppressors like Friesland Campini, that we now get a premium for grazing, but it changes a bit to low footprint. Less premium on grazing, more premium on footprint. That's a change going on. Yeah. I think Maria Klopczak wants to ask a question.
Maria has a question.
Now we can expect a difficult question.
Only easy question from Maria.
So thank you very much to all 5 speakers for very interesting presentation. And I have 2 questions, one for Paul and one for George. Paul, you mentioned intensity for milk per hectare, and you said that emissions per hectare is higher with higher intensity.
Yeah.
But do you think that this is correct? Because we need to look on the emissions per kilo milk or kilo meat, and not per hectare. Because I'm sure that if you have 20,000 milk per hectare, is lower emissions than for 4 hectares with 5,000 kilo milk per hectare. I'm sure. This is one question, and for George. George, you mentioned that you use one tool to calculate emissions, but I cannot follow the name of this tool. And I have a question: if this tool is also available for our other European farmers.
Okay, I'll come in first. The tool is called AgNav, Maria, and it's probably country specific. So it isn't really freely available at the moment, number one, and probably the underlying assumptions mightn't be as applicable to Slovenia, for example, as they are to the Irish situation. Having said that, Maria, I can send you on a short presentation that explains what's going on for your particular information.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Thank you. Thank you. I will be very thankful. Thanks.
You're more than welcome.
Yeah, Maria, your question about how to express emissions per hectare or per kilogram milk. Ammonia emission is coming from the barn and from the field, almost 50-50. So if you the ammonia emission from the barn, if you divide it by hectares, and then of course the more intensive, the more ammonia emission per hectare. So we express in our discussion with farmers mostly the emission from the barn per cow and the emission from the field per hectare. That's the best way. And if you talk about greenhouse gas emissions, the government wants to express it per hectare, and the milk suppliers, milk processors want to express it per kilogram of milk. So that's always the discussion going on. Yeah.
Yeah, but this make a lot of confusing in the society with how we deal with this data and with this information.
Yeah. Well, ammonia emission is a local problem. And in the Netherlands, if you live close to a nature area, you have to lower it per hectare. And that's why less cattle close to nature areas, less inputs of concentrates and fertilizers. But if you look at greenhouse gases, it's a global problem. And then I would suggest to express it per kilogram of milk. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
Maria, I have a question for you though. How is it possible that farmers, there is unrest in Europe, but in Slovenia it is quiet? So you keep your farmers very happy, it seems.
You want some more protest?
Okay, no, we continue now with Isabel. You have more questions? Isabel, are there others? In the meantime,
Caroline.
In the meantime, I made just a remark about the answer of Paul just a moment ago about that we like the dairy company to give bonuses to more sustainable produced milk. Sure, that's a nice principle, but it doesn't really present yet a business model, because what is the company doing, the milk company? They pay 2 cents more for milk from grazing farms, and they deduct it from the others. So on average, the total volume of money stays the same. So it's more punishing some and giving preference to others. And that's not really yet the business model for the whole sector. Then the price should rise overall. So that's just a little command to see the things in perspective. Caroline.
More questions?
No, that's all for the questions.
Okay.
I think we will close the session now, and yeah, if people still have questions, you can write to Paul, Abele, George, Adam, or Trevor. That would be the best way, I think.
Yeah.
So
Thank you, Caroline.
thank you very much to you 5. Have a nice day.
Bye, guys.
I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you all very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.